Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, today's video is going to be about, at least in my opinion, and I believe in the opinion of a great number of people, about arguably one of the most important heroes in terms of the history of human civilization, in terms of artistic expression. This is a character who sort of just embodies the notion of what a hero is, what we would want a hero to be, and then has just managed to consistently tell story after story after story, which has charmed, delighted, and honestly inspired generation after generation of storytellers who approach the notion of what is heroism, what do we want heroism to be, what do we want it to look like, and how do we define villainy in the context of this hero. Naturally, the character I'm talking about is Super Mario. Yeah, okay, just misdirection. Irony. Oh, God, I'm a nerd. Anyway, yes, today's video is in fact about a Super Mario comic book. And seriously, I had no idea this book actually existed. I was recently in Barnes & Noble because I wanted to pick up a copy of Lindsay Ellis's new novel, Axiom's End, which, if you haven't checked it out, definitely would recommend it. I haven't got a chance to start reading it yet, but I've been talking with several friends who have, and they legitimately enjoy it. Plus, it's Lindsay Ellis, like, enough said. Anyway, however, Lindsay, if you're watching this, hi. I'm going to stop being awkward now and get back to the book. Anyway, I was in Barnes & Noble. I picked up Lindsay's book. I also was checking out some Albert Camus. And then, because it's me, I decided to head over to the graphic novels and see the selection. For the most part, just about everything they had was stuff that my local comic book shop, Ground Zero Comics, had, so I didn't pick out anything significant. But then while I was sort of combing the shelves, I saw on the spine Super Mario Adventures, and I was like, what? So, naturally, I pulled it out and was like, okay, this looks kind of cute, but, like, surely it's not going to be that interesting. And then, of course, I opened the pages up, and it was that moment where I was not only, like, charmed and surprised at, like, how good it actually looked, but just reading some of the dialogue balloons and little parts of the story, I was like, I'm buying this. I need to buy this. So I picked it up, and I bought it, and I brought it home, and I read it, and now I'm going to talk about it because, and this is a fun fact, this year, Super Mario turns 35 years old. Now, I'm not going to get into the history of Super Mario and Nintendo and then just the rise of the company and this particular character and his role in making Nintendo what it is. There's already dozens of YouTubers out there that are already doing it, and again, this channel is always about comics, why they're important, and what comics, in my opinion, contribute to the medium overall. I will, however, post a link in the description section below to the video game historian, who, if you haven't checked him out, I would definitely recommend it. His videos are exactly what his title suggests. He is a historian who sits down and does research about video games, video game companies, video game technologies, individual games themselves, their development, the way they impacted the culture, what have you. And seriously, this is me just plugging another channel, absolutely. Go check out the Video Game Historian because he's great, he's approachable, he doesn't assume a wacky, crazy character, he's not a doomsayer by any means, he's not a jerk, and also, more importantly, he does really good research and cites all of his sources accordingly. So, seriously, if you want to know about Super Mario World, the Super Mario games, Nintendo, what have you, definitely check out the Video Game Historian. Alright. Plug over. Let's get now to why I want to talk about this book. Well, because, one, Super Mario turns 35 years old, and so I wanted to talk about that because I did mean everything I said at the start of this. I wasn't just trying to, like, do the Superman Mario crossover thing. It's true. Super Mario was revolutionary in terms of revolutionizing an industry, turning video games into such a commonplace aspect of our day-to-day lives. And even to this day, when we have games like Fortnite and Gears of War and Doom and Fallout, which, if you haven't seen the shirts that I wear regularly, I'm a huge fan of Fallout. But even I acknowledge the fact that growing up, I had a Super Nintendo, and I can still summon the Super Mario theme. I can still play some of those levels from Super Mario World in my sleep. Like, literally, when I was a kid, I would have dreams where I would be playing Super Mario. And I imagine there were a whole host of other kids who did as well. Super Mario is not just an aspect of nostalgia, though, because the character is still so much a part of the culture. Even to this day, Super Mario is more recognizable around the world than Mickey Mouse. And that's saying something. The definitive American icon of cartoons and animation, what have you, is somehow less popular than This Italian Plumber, which was created in the imagination of Higeru Miyamoto. I mean, Mario has so much to offer the culture, and it's important that we talk about it. Not just because a great number of us wasted our childhood indoors playing Super Nintendo and the original NES system, but also because his story is still something that resonates. And so, looking at this comic, I thought it'd be an interesting opportunity to sort of understand Mario as a character, and then also just try to understand, like, a character who's not really associated with comics for whatever reason. How does this book contribute to the lasting cultural legacy of Super Mario? So, with all that plugging and talking out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what is this book about and why I think it's kind of interesting. Okay, now, stay. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about Super Mario Adventures and what just the content of this book is about. First, I did want to talk a little bit about the publication itself. These comics originally appeared, and the very back of the book, there's a small little paragraph that gives the reader an understanding of what exactly these comics are. I'll just read it straight. The first 12 comic episodes presented in this book originally ran as a series in Nintendo Power magazine beginning in January 1992, volume 32, and running through December 1992. The final episode, which was printed in the first issue of 1993, introduced Mario's alter ego and tormented childhood playmate Wario. The comics don't follow the storyline of any particular game, however they do incorporate many characters from the games and even introduce some new ones. So, looking at these comics, it's important to recognize this is kind of a multimedia tie-in. Nintendo had launched the magazine Nintendo Power, which I believe is still in circulation, but don't quote me on that. I just remember reading it a lot as a kid and really enjoying the magazine, and there were usually comics inside of it alongside, cheat codes, game guides, game reviews, what have you. This comic, then, we have to understand, is, or at least originally in spirit, largely an effort to sort of drive the content of the Super Mario video games and really establish the brand that Nintendo was trying to create. So, right off the bat, we have to understand the artistic guide here is originally, anyway, more of just a way of sort of enticing readers into the story. Now, having said that, the two authors, Kentaro Takekuma and Charlie Nozawa, yes, sorry, again, I'm an East Texan, Japanese names. I was learning Japanese, and then my tutor moved to ARP, and then she should be moving to Japan within the next year. So, alas, my pronunciation is still pretty weak. Anyway, the two creators here still managed, despite the fact that this is at first kind of supposed to be just a plug for the Super Mario video games, actually managed to tell, a pretty interesting story. It predominantly begins with Mario and Luigi being called to the Mushroom Kingdom because, as you can see, there's a problem going on with the pipes. They're doing their job for all of, say, 5 minutes before suddenly dozens, if not, dozens of pipes appear, launching Goombas and Koopa Troopas and all manner of villains into the Mushroom Kingdom, before eventually King Koopa, aka Bowser, crashes the party and then wants to kidnap Princess Peach to make her his bride. Now, after that, at first it seems like a sort of standard Mario story, but perhaps what's really interesting in this book is that Princess Peach kind of defies the image that has sort of hounded her character for decades. Princess Peach is often simply the damsel in distress. She gets captured by Bowser, she tries to resist, but for the most part, she tends to be overpowered. What's interesting about this book is it really veers away from that. Princess Peach is actually this kind of precocious woman who rallies her troops almost to fight Bowser, and even to the last breath is continually saying, "No, I will never marry you." Not because Mario is going to save me, but just because, no, I'm not going to marry you. So right off the bat, content-wise, Super Mario Adventures is kind of unique in the fact that it represents the character who is almost the ideal damsel in distress, and paints her in a vein that's like anything but. Now, just about everybody else in this character tends to match on what most people are aware of if they've ever played even just one Super Mario game. Bowser, of course, is kind of the big bully who's absolutely obsessed with Princess Peach. And then, let me see. You see he and his tall tower, which is actually very, very prettily rendered here, but I'll get to that in a minute, is sort of constantly worried about his wedding day, and he really wants Princess Peach to fall in love with him. And then, of course, you have the Koopa kids. Now, Bowser having a kid was really introduced to me when I played Super Mario Sunshine on the GameCube, and yes, I am that old, but I mean, you watch this channel regularly, you should know that by now. But that was the first time I was really aware of it, even though I had played Super Mario 3 growing up. I just never registered that he had had kids. The story is also really unique in the fact that it manages to usually have Bowser's children as unique and interesting characters. Now, alongside of just Bowser kidnapping Princess Peach, taking her to his castle, you have the characters of Mario and Luigi, which pretty much follow the standard type. Super Mario is kind of this sort of brave, sort of gung-ho hero who needs to rescue the princess, while Luigi is, for the most part, kind of the, well, scaredy cat who's always like, I don't know about this, to which case I just basically hummed the Luigi's Mansion theme music over and over and over again. Nintendo's gonna love this video. It's nothing but me plugging their games, but, I mean, like, do it? Anyway, what's also kind of unique, too, is the fact that, let me see, there's a character in the book, and I'm positive the video game historian has talked about it at some point, a character by the name of Friendly Floyd. Now, this character has, as far as I'm aware of, never really made an appearance in any of the Super Mario games, and in fact, this character is kind of just a 2-bit con artist who's kind of constantly selling things to people. He makes these random appearances, and at one point, it works. He manages to sell a Princess Peach dress to Luigi, who has to sneak into Bowser's Kingdom to ultimately save Mario, who's ridden a bullet bill into the castle. This character is actually based off of a real-life individual, and I believe it's supposed to be a homage to his character. All the same, he makes these random appearances that are more or less just kind of like just Deus Ex Machina appearances that are there to really just sort of further the plot. But alongside his character, you also get a familiar face. Perhaps you might, recognize him if you've ever played a little game called Super Smash Bros. Mario and Luigi, chasing after Bowser and Princess Peach, stumble upon this dinosaur who runs around. They're afraid that he's going to eat them, and then eventually he manages to save them by eating one of the giant caterpillars. At the end of the day, Mario and Luigi manage to save Princess Peach from Bowser's castle, but then are ultimately betrayed by a sort of pipe that they think is actually taking them back to the Mushroom Kingdom, when in fact it's actually a plot by Bowser. They chase after him and wound up outside of a spooky house. Now, immediately, anybody who played Super Mario World like I did knows, spooky house. Can't imagine what that could be. Well, sure enough, it happens to be a house full of booze. If you've never played Super Mario, which at this point in the video, if you haven't played Super Mario, all of these references are probably going over your head, but boos were ghosts. They were just these little spirits that tended to operate in these ghost houses. The thing was, if you looked at them, they would be like, they were all shy. The moment you turned your back, they started going, I'm gonna chase you. It was kind of creepy as a kid, and it didn't help that the music for the ghost houses was creepy too. But Mario and Luigi managed to encounter these boos, but what's unique about this book is, while in the past boos have often been just kind of these villains you have to run away from, Mario and Luigi managed to beat the boos by talking to the lead boo and talking about how he was picked on as a kid, and so they effectively offer Boo psychiatric help in order to, get out of the house. Again, this is not the traditional Super Mario and Luigi storyline. Anyway, long story short, eventually Mario and Luigi crash the wedding. They beat Bowser's plans by literally summoning an army, or freeing an army of Yoshis who defeat Bowser's forces, and he is eventually ruined. That is 99.9% of the story. Then there's one final issue at the very end where we get introduced to an interesting character by the name of Wario. Now, growing up, I don't know if you were like me, but all of my friends had a Game Boy. I did not. I got the Game Boy Color by the time everybody was getting N64. But while everybody was playing their Game Boys, they were playing Wario World. That was a game I wanted so much, but didn't get. So anytime I get the chance to interact with the character Wario, I always enjoy it, because it's a chance of sort of, I suppose, catching a bit of childhood I missed, but he's also an interesting character. However, in the games, Wario is often presented as a bully, as a grump. What's unique about the Super Mario Adventures comic is that Wario is presented here not as a villain, but instead as a kid who often got picked on by Mario as a kid. He invites Mario to his castle, Mario beats all of Wario's goons, and then Wario decides how I'm going to tell him how much he hurt my feelings, ancient history ago. And then it ends with Mario basically just going like, oh, you're too sensitive. Come on, let's play cowboys and Indians again, and you can be the Indian, and sheriffs and cowboy and sheriff. I'll be sheriff again as always, and you can be the cowboy, and Wario ends crying. I don't know about you, but my first thought was Mario's kind of a dick. Which is weird in terms of a Mario book. So this has been a very long, at least from my standards, sort of summary of the content of this book. But I did all this to kind of show that this book is kind of unique and interesting and very different than the sort of expected material of what a Super Mario comic would be. But this gets into an interesting idea of, content-wise, how multimedia experiences can be so radically different. The thing that we get in the video game is very interactive. We play as Mario or Luigi trying to rescue Princess Peach, so naturally these characters can sometimes seem very two-dimensional. What's unique about this book is it offers a different perspective of the characters, and because it's a comic and because it's a story, these characters are allowed to sort of flesh out a little bit. The Super Mario franchise has often been a kind of escapist fantasy in the way that a lot of superhero stories tend to be. And so what's really unique about this is it takes a comic, which has often been, especially in terms of a commercial setting, a very superhero escapist power fantasy opportunity, and instead manages to tell, I would argue, a really interesting story. There's probably a great number of people who are never going to find this book and never pick it up, but if you're a longtime fan of the character of Super Mario, or if you just find him interesting, or if you're just wanting to do something about media studies and you want to sort of explore the dimension of the experience of playing a video game versus reading a comic, this is a really interesting opportunity, largely because of the content. Again, Takekuma and Nozawa managed to tell a really interesting story, and they actually managed to do something with this book, content-wise, that's so dramatically different than any of the video games that I played growing up. But now, looking at the content itself, it's also important to understand that this is also a really interesting book visually and formally. And so let's now talk a little bit about why I think Super Mario Adventures isn't a good book in terms of the medium of comics itself. Okay, so I've told a very long story of what Super Mario Adventures is about and why I think content-wise it's pretty interesting. But let's now also talk a little bit now why I think formally this is actually a pretty interesting book. Now, obviously, when we're talking about the form of comics, we have to understand, as always, that what we're discussing is how are the artists using the arrangement of panels on the page in order to communicate the story. And this gets into the idea of, are they using iconographic art, photorealistic art? Are they using the panels in such a way to deliver emotional energy, or are they simply using panels to sort of create, or just to place characters in there and just let the panels just be the panels? This is an important dimension because, again, when I talk about artists like, say, Robert Crumb, he tends to be the artist, he tends to be the sort of artist where he largely just puts out square panels, usually 9, 6, or 12-page layouts, and he lets the interior characters inside of the panels do most of the work. What's interesting about Super Mario Adventures is it could have potentially done just that. Again, this is a comic being put out in Nintendo Power, which means, for the most part, it was originally just designed to sort of encourage kids to talk to their parents and get them to buy a Super Nintendo so they could play the video games. But what's interesting is the fact that if you just look through this book, you can observe there's a lot of play being done in terms of panel layouts, character designs, and the way characters interact with the panels. I picked this first page here because you see on this previous page, Luigi, disguised as Princess Peach, is talking to Bowser through the video and telling him, I love you so much, I want to get married right away. Bowser, of course, is saying, "Oh my god, she loves me." First off, you have this wonderful panel right here where Bowser's face completely fills the page. Rather than just showing his whole body, they do a close-up on the face, sort of engage you into his sort of emotional reaction to this declaration of love. But then, just the very next panel, you see his mouth literally spilling over the edges of the panel as well. And if you look at just these two pages as well, you don't just have a series of 6 squares on a page. Rather, again, they play with the arrangement of the panels. Some are smaller than others because these artists recognize, again, Charlie Nozawa manages to understand, or really, comprehends that the emotions and the sort of actions taking place in the story can have a much more powerful effect by playing with the arrangement of the panels themselves. Likewise, in the later passage here, at the start of, I believe this was episode, you know what, I'm not going to bother with that. The point is here, Mario and Luigi stumble upon the Boo House, and they begin to recognize that they're cornered and surrounded. Again, right off the bat, you see the emotional reaction of Mario discovering the giant Boo behind him. His sort of like nose exhale of like, "Oh my god," is spilling off the page. But if you also take a step back, you'll observe the sort of diagonal cross-sections that are taking place on this page itself. Rather than just simply use Mario's expressions in order to sort of convey the fear, they're also arranging very sort of diagonal patterns and then some of these long patterns here of the Boos charging at them to really heighten the dramatic tension that's taking place in the story. If I can go back to that page where Bowser is realizing that Princess Peach loves him, or really that Luigi is pretending to love him, the very next page has Princess Peach dressed up in Luigi's clothes charging Bowser's tall tower, and we see in the small panel down here a very dramatic moment, or what we would consider dramatic. We have Peach standing here at the forefront, we have these characters, we get a sense of perspective and scale, and then the colors and the bright fonts in the background really create a sense of energy and dynamism. And then, of course, if I can go back to this page here, where we have the literal army of Yoshis, which, dude, that kicks ass. Anyway, you see here at this moment when Bowser's army is standing up against the army of Yoshis, we have this huge panel right here in the middle of the page. Again, we're talking about a comic that was largely produced inside of a video game periodical. For the most part, something like that isn't really designed to be so dynamic. It's just to be sort of part of the content. What's unique about this comic is it doesn't just try to tell a basic story. It tries to use the medium of comics to tell the story. And so it may not seem terribly much, but taking this much page space to show an entire army of Yoshis charging at a line of Koopa Troopas and Goombas, what have you, and then all of them being like crushed underneath all of those Yoshi feet, is a pretty interesting artistic choice. And then again, when we talk at the very last comic about the figure of Wario, what's interesting about this book is this 2-page panel spread right here is really interesting because it sort of, again, reinforces the notion that Takekuma and Nozawa are really taking the time to use the panel layouts and use the character designs and perspectives to set the emotional register. You'll note Mario's page, the colors tend to be very bright, very happy, and down here in the bottom, we have this interesting panel layout as he's sort of shifting through his memories. This sort of central pattern here where we have memory, 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 honestly reflects the way our memories actually tend to work, or at least the way his memories are working. Whereas when we come to Wario, we see a lot of bold, deeper hues to sort of convey Wario's sadness and anger. And then as well, rather than having his memories being sort of like flowy and sort of happy, instead his memories are contained in solid, rigid rectangles. This is, like, honestly a really good way of conveying a story through comics. Again, I was kind of impressed by the end of this book in terms of the character designs, which sometimes almost seem kind of like Popeye-esque. So it reminds me a lot of Max Fleischer animations, which again, no doubt Nintendo probably took some inspiration from. The art in this book is really solid. The artistic direction in this book is really solid. There's a lot of good choices in terms of colors. There's a lot of good choices in terms of panel layouts. And again, Takekuma and Nozawa managed to convey a lot of emotions and ideas through their line work, through their panel layouts, what have you. Super Mario Adventures, for the most part, seems like just an opportunity for just a quick little multimedia way to sort of capitalize on a fad and just a really solid character. But instead, formally, this is actually a pretty good book. Like, again, it was one of those situations like, okay, this is good. Wait a minute, this is good. This is good. This wasn't supposed to be good. Why is this good? You know what? I'll take it. This is a good Super Mario book. And so now at 7 minutes, I realize I'm still pushing this a little bit long. So I'll just say, formally, fans of the Super Mario franchise are probably going to find something fun to read in this book. But makers of comics and fans of comics are going to find something to really enjoy and appreciate in this book, because there's a lot of good creative choices from which you can take inspiration from. And so if you're a fan of comics, if you study comics, if you want to make comics, if you can find this book, definitely check it out, because it will give you so many ideas about how to convey things in your story. And so with that at hand, let's do the final hurrah and call it a day. Okay, now, I said stay. Anyway, Super Mario Adventures is a really good book. And again, I read it and I thought to myself, again, this is good. This shouldn't have been good. This is just, pulpy comics made to help sell cartridges. But in fact, Super Mario Adventures is actually a really interesting comic. Like I noted before, it tends to remind me a lot of something akin to Popeye or some of those early Max Fleischer cartoons. What you have is a cartoony hero story, which perfectly fits within the larger rhetoric of the Super Mario universe. Content-wise, however, this story is different than what a traditional Nintendo player will find. Rather than a sort of submissive, scared Princess Peach, we have a precocious monarch who's willing to fight to her last breath. We have the traditional characters of Mario and Luigi and Yoshi, and while their stories tend to be pretty familiar, they still manage to surprise us throughout the story and remind us why they tend to sort of embody the sort of heroism that we've come to expect out of them, but they also manage to have really interesting and original characters without just being empty cartoon characters in and of themselves. There's a lot of interesting creative choices here in terms of the content, and then formally, there's a lot of attention paid to how panel layouts and how the form and the medium can contribute to a lot of the dramatic choices taking place within the story. Enough said. Super Mario Adventures was arguably one of the most unintentionally great comics that I've read in the course of my life, and so if you get the chance to read it, I would definitely recommend it to you. Not simply because Mario is turning 35 years old and looks like he's still going strong at this point, but also because it's an interesting opportunity to see how Nintendo managed to take their intellectual property and tell a legitimately interesting story through it. And honestly, having read this, I really hope they take a chance like this again. I would love to see more Super Mario comics because, Lord, if we're willing to keep reading Mickey Mouse cartoons, if we're willing to keep putting out Prince Valiant's, what have you, it doesn't make any sense to me why Nintendo hasn't continued to put out great comics. If they have, please leave a comment in the section below and let me know where I can find some, because I would love to read more of this, and I hope you would love to read more of this by the end of it. Super Mario is, as I said from the start, a character who sort of embodies our notions of what heroism is. It's archetypal, but what Super Mario Adventures manages to do is tell a human story and remind us why we like this character and this universe in the first place. It's magical and wacky and weird, but it's fun, which is what escapist comics and hero comics and cartoon comics like this are supposed to be doing. Alright, I'm going to call it a day there. Thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, all that jazz. It helps me know that you're liking these videos and that you want to see more. Again, if you have suggestions or just you want to comment on the videos themselves, again, as always, leave a comment. I may not respond right away, but I promise I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. As for Super Mario Adventures, like I said, I got this at Barnes & Noble, but I would definitely recommend check your local comic book shop first because they might have a copy of it, and if not, they might be able to get you a copy of it. And then also as well, these comics originally appeared in the 1992 issues of Nintendo Power, which your local comic book shop might have a couple of old issues for. You can probably also track down a couple of those on eBay as well, but try your comic book shop first because comic book shops are important and they need your help right now in this time of plague more than ever. Also, check your local public library. They might have a copy of it, and if they don't, they can probably get it to you through interlibrary loan. As always, thank y'all so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. Go play some video games, and then read some comics.